I was standing at the kitchen sink when my phone rang, and for a moment, I almost didn't answer. It was early evening, the quiet hour when the day exhales. The kettle was humming softly, the windows half open to let in the smell of rain, and the house felt settled, the way it always did when nothing was supposed to happen. Then I saw my son's name on the screen. My youngest, the pilot. I smiled as I wiped my hands on a towel. He rarely called while working. When he did, it was usually something quick and cheerful. Just landed safely, Mom, or look out the window tonight. I'll be flying over your city. Hello, sweetheart, I said. His voice came back tight, controlled, not the voice of a man cruising 30,000 feet above the earth. Mom, he whispered, I need you to answer me very carefully. That alone made my stomach tighten. Are you alone? He asked. I glanced around the kitchen. The chair tucked in, the hallway empty, the old clock ticking faithfully on the wall. No, I said. Your wife is here. She stopped by earlier. There was a pause on the line long enough for the kettle to click off behind me. Then he said, very softly, That's impossible. I laughed, a small, nervous sound. What do you mean, impossible? She's been here for almost an hour. Mom, he whispered, she just boarded my flight. The words didn't make sense at first. They hovered in the air, waiting for my mind to catch up. That's not funny, I said. I'm not joking, he replied. I could hear muffled voices in the background, the distant echo of an airplane cabin. I saw her with my own eyes. She showed her ID. She smiled at me when she passed the cockpit. My heart began to beat faster. You must be mistaken, I said. Maybe she looks like her. No, he said firmly. I know my own wife. I opened my mouth to answer and stopped, because at that exact moment, I heard something behind me. Footsteps, slow, familiar, coming from the hallway. I turned slightly, keeping my voice steady. She's walking toward the living room right now, I whispered into the phone. There was silence on the other end. Then my son said something that made the air leave my lungs. Mom, he said, don't turn around. The footsteps stopped. I stared at the reflection in the darkened window above the sink, my own face pale and older than it had been 5 minutes ago. Stay on the line, he said. Tell me exactly what you see. My hand tightened around the phone, because in the reflection, just behind my shoulder, someone was standing there. And she was smiling at me the way a person does when they already know something you don't. My body froze, but my mind did something strange. It went calm. Not peaceful, just sharp, focused, as if every small instinct I'd ever learned finally woke up at once. I see her, I whispered into the phone, careful not to move my lips too much. She's standing near the doorway. Does she know you're on the call? My son asked. I don't think so. Behind me, the woman, my daughter-in-law, or someone wearing her face, tilted her head slightly, as if listening. The kitchen light cast a soft glow on the counter, and in the reflection, I could see the familiar curve of her hair, the cardigan I had seen her wear dozens of times. But something was wrong. She wasn't holding her purse. She never went anywhere without it. She looks normal, I said, hating how uncertain I sounded. But she's not speaking. Mom, my son said, his voice low and urgent. I'm in the air. I can't help you from here, but you need to trust me. I swallowed. What do you want me to do? There was a pause. I imagined him gripping the edge of the cockpit seat, weighing every word. Ask her something only my wife would know, he said. My heart thudded so hard I was afraid she could hear it. I slowly turned, just enough to face her without fully exposing the phone. She smiled wider when our eyes met. There you are, she said cheerfully. I was wondering where you went. Her voice was perfect, warm, familiar. What's the matter? She asked. You look pale. I forced a smile. Long day, I said. Tell me, did you ever find that silver bracelet you lost last winter? It was something small, something personal. A gift from my son she'd been heartbroken over. For a split second, just a breath, her smile faltered. Then she laughed lightly. You mean the necklace? My stomach dropped. It wasn't a necklace, I said. Her eyes flicked to the phone in my hand. The air shifted. On the other end of the line, my son inhaled sharply. Mom, that's not her. The woman took a step closer. I could see now that her eyes were colder than I remembered. Too still. Who are you talking to? She asked gently. I backed toward the counter, my free hand braced against it. My son, I said. Her smile disappeared. I think you're confused, she said softly. You've been forgetting things lately, haven't you? The words sent a chill through me, not because they were cruel, but because they sounded practiced. On the phone, my son's voice broke through, strained but steady. Mom, listen to me. You need to get out of that house. I can't, I whispered. She's blocking the hallway. The woman reached out slowly, as if to take my arm. Come sit down, she said. You're upset. That's when I noticed something else. Her shoes. Wet, muddy, as if she'd just come in from outside, not from a drive across town. My heart pounded in my ears, because suddenly the question wasn't why she was here. It was how long she had been waiting inside my home. I had raised 3 children, buried a husband, and lived through enough quiet disasters to know one thing for certain. Panic is a luxury you can't afford when you're cornered. I forced myself to breathe slowly, the way I used to when my boys were small and frightened. If I lost control now, I would give her exactly what she wanted. Let me make some tea, I said, keeping my voice even. We'll both feel better. The woman studied me. Her eyes moved not like someone worried, but like someone calculating. Then she nodded. That's a good idea, she said. You always say tea helps you think. That sentence sent another chill through me. She knew my habits, my phrases, the rhythms of my life. Not perfectly, but well enough to pass if no one questioned her. On the phone, my son spoke again, quieter now. Mom, I need you to get to a locked room. Bathroom, bedroom, anywhere. I'll try, I murmured. I turned toward the stove, deliberately slow. The kettle was still warm. My back was to her now, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to move faster, but I didn't. I moved like a woman with nothing to hide. Behind me, I heard her shift her weight. "I'll get the cups," she said. That was my opening. I picked up the kettle with one hand, and with the other, slid my phone into the pocket of my sweater, keeping the call open. The hallway to the bedroom was only a few steps away. "Mom," my son whispered urgently. "Now." I dropped the kettle. Water splashed across the floor, the metal clanging loudly. Steam burst upward, filling the kitchen with hissing sound and confusion. "Oh no," I cried, stepping back. "I'm so clumsy." She rushed forward instinctively, and I ran. My knees screamed in protest, but fear carried me faster than years ever could. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and turned the lock just as her body hit the other side. "Open this door," she said sharply. I backed away, my heart hammering. On the phone, my son's voice was frantic now. "Mom, listen to me. Stay in that room. Don't let her in." The doorknob rattled. "You're hurting yourself," she called through the door, her voice suddenly sweet again. "You know you get confused." I pressed my back against the dresser, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Mom," my son said, "I need you to check something." "What?" I whispered. "Is there anything missing? Anything moved?" I scanned the room through blurred eyes. The bed was neat, the curtains half drawn. Then I noticed it. My jewelry box. Open, empty, my breath caught. "She took something," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then my son said quietly, "Mom, that means she wasn't here for me." A loud bang struck the door. I flinched. "She was there for you." And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone pretending to be my daughter-in-law. This was someone who had been watching my family long enough to step into her life at the exact moment she wasn't supposed to be home. And if I had answered the door even 5 minutes earlier, I don't think I would be telling you this story at all. The banging stopped. That silence frightened me more than the noise ever could. I stood there, barely breathing, my ear pressed to the door, listening for anything, footsteps, a sigh, even the scrape of fabric. But the hallway had gone eerily still, like the house itself was holding its breath. "Mom," my son whispered through the phone. "Is she still there?" "I don't hear her," I said, "and that's what scares me." He didn't argue. He understood. Pilots learn quickly that silence can mean many things, and none of them are good. "Stay locked in," he said. "I've alerted airport security. They're checking her boarding pass right now." My heart skipped. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that whoever she is, she didn't get on that plane by accident." I slid down onto the edge of the bed, my legs trembling now that the running was over. My eyes drifted to the empty jewelry box again. My wedding ring was gone, the one I rarely wore but never threw away, the one with my initials engraved inside, a souvenir or proof. "Mom," my son said, "I need you to tell me everything you remember. When did she arrive? What did she say first?" I closed my eyes, forcing my mind backward. She rang the bell, I said slowly. Smiled, said she was nearby and thought she'd stop in. She hugged me. She smelled like her perfume. My voice caught. Even her perfume. That's not something you guess, my son muttered. The floor creaked outside the bedroom. I froze. She's still in the house, I whispered. The creak came again, closer this time. Slow, careful. She wasn't rushing anymore. She was searching. Mom, my son said, his voice breaking slightly. You need to be ready to leave through the window if she gets in. I looked at the window. It opened to the backyard. A small drop, but survivable. I don't think she wants me to leave, I whispered. I think she wants me calm. As if on cue, her voice floated through the door again, soft now, almost tender. I know you're scared, she said, but I'm not here to hurt you. I felt tears sting my eyes, not because I believed her, but because of how convincing she sounded. You just startled yourself, she continued. Let me help you. Open the door. On the phone, my son exhaled sharply. Don't listen to her. That's not my wife's voice when she's worried. That's someone trained to sound soothing. Trained. The word settled into my bones. I edged toward the window, my hand on the latch. Mom, my son said suddenly. Security confirmed something. What? I whispered. The woman on my flight used a real ID, he said. Your daughter-in-law's, reported stolen 2 weeks ago. My blood ran cold. That meant the woman in my house hadn't just planned today. She had planned me. A shadow passed under the crack of the bedroom door. She was right outside again. Please, she said softly, I don't want this to be harder than it has to be. I unlocked the window, the night air rushing in. My heart pounded as I whispered into the phone, if I don't make it out, you will, my son said fiercely. You will. I took one last look at the room where I had lived so many quiet years. Then I climbed onto the windowsill. Because whatever waited behind that door was far more dangerous than the dark outside. The ground felt harder than I expected. I landed awkwardly, my knees screaming as I stumbled forward into the damp grass of my backyard. Pain shot up my legs, sharp and immediate, but I welcomed it. It meant I was alive, moving, thinking. I didn't stop. I ran barefoot across the yard, my nightgown clutched in one hand, the phone still pressed to my ear with the other. The fence loomed ahead, tall and familiar. My husband had built it years ago, complaining the whole time about the uneven ground. I whispered a thank you to his memory as I climbed. Mom, keep going, my son urged. I could hear alarms now in the background of his call, muted voices, urgency. Police are on their way to your house. I dropped into the neighbor's yard and hurried toward the back door. My hands shook so badly I almost missed the lock. But when it opened, warm light spilled out, and I nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Calder, my neighbor of 15 years, stared at me in shock. Good Lord, what happened to you? Call the police, I said breathlessly. Someone's in my house. She didn't ask questions. She pulled me inside and locked the door, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders as if instinct took over where words failed. Only then did my body begin to shake. Through the window, I could see my house standing quietly in the dark, every light still on. It looked peaceful, innocent, like nothing terrible had ever happened inside its walls. But I knew better now. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, red and blue lights washed over the street. Doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. My heart hammered so loudly I thought I might faint. "Mom," my son said softly into the phone, "they've landed. I'm not leaving this call until I know you're safe." I watched as officers entered my home, flashlights cutting through the windows. One by one, rooms were searched. Then I saw them escort her out, even from across the yard. I knew it wasn't my daughter-in-law. The face was close enough to fool a stranger. The hair, the clothes, the posture, all carefully chosen. But when she looked up and caught sight of me through the neighbor's window, the smile was gone. There was no warmth in her eyes, only irritation, like I had ruined something she had practiced for a long time. She had gloves, one officer later told me, and items belonging to you in her pockets. Jewelry, papers, copies of family records. Copies. That word echoed in my mind. They took her away without another glance in my direction. When the street finally quieted and the officers assured me it was safe, I sank into Mrs. Calder's couch, exhausted to my bones. My son was still on the line, silent now, breathing slowly. "Mom," he said at last, "I don't think this was random." I closed my eyes. Neither do I, because as the adrenaline faded, one terrible thought rose to the surface, clear and unavoidable. She hadn't come just to steal. She had come prepared to become someone else. And if my son hadn't called when he did, if I had turned around instead of listening, the woman they would have escorted out of my house might not have been her. It might have been me. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Even after the police cleared it, even after they promised she had acted alone, the rooms felt unfamiliar, as if they had learned a secret about me and were waiting to see what I would do next. I spent that night at Mrs. Calder's, wrapped in a borrowed robe, staring at the ceiling while the world tried to settle back into its shape. It didn't. The next morning, a detective came to speak with me. He was gentle, methodical, the kind of man who understood that fear doesn't fade just because danger leaves. "She didn't choose you at random," he said, flipping through his notes. "She's been watching your family for months." My throat tightened. "Why?" "She had access to personal details," he continued. "Schedules, travel plans, family habits. Enough to know when your daughter-in-law would be out of town and when your pilot son would be unreachable except by phone." I thought of the timing, the precision. "This was practice," I whispered. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And you weren't meant to survive the rehearsal." The words settled heavy in my chest. They let me return home later that day, but not before changing the locks and installing temporary alarms. I walked through each room slowly, flinching at every shadow, every creak. My jewelry box sat on the dresser, empty and accusing. That afternoon, my son called again, this time from the ground. His voice sounded different. Older. "I'm flying home," he said. "I don't care about schedules." "I don't want you risking your job," I replied. "I almost lost you," he said simply. When he arrived that evening, he hugged me like he hadn't since he was a boy. No words, just arms tight around me, as if anchoring himself to proof that I was still here. We sat at the kitchen table long into the night. He told me investigators believed she was part of a small group that targeted elderly people living alone, women with predictable routines, and families scattered by work. "She chose your wife's face because it bought her time," he said. "Trust, trust." I nodded slowly. And silence. "Yes," he said. Later, after he fell asleep in the guest room, I sat alone with a cup of tea that had gone cold. I stared at the spot by the doorway where she had stood smiling at me. I realized then how thin the line is between ordinary days and unthinkable ones. How safety isn't something we earn by being kind or careful. Sometimes it's something we keep only because someone calls at the right moment and we choose to listen. But as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, one thought refused to leave me. She had been caught, but she hadn't been alone. And the most frightening thing about predators like her is not how they enter your life. It's how easily they wear a familiar face while doing it. The days that followed were filled with noise, paperwork, phone calls, officers coming and going. But inside me, everything went very quiet. That quiet is dangerous. It gives memories too much room to speak. I kept replaying the moment my son's voice changed on the phone. The way instinct had taken over before fear could paralyze me. I wondered how many other women had stood where I stood, heard what I heard, and never got that call. The detective returned midweek with an update. He sat at my kitchen table, notebook closed this time. "She's not talking," he said, "but what we found confirms she wasn't acting on impulse." "What kind of group?" I asked. "People who study families," he replied. "They watch patterns. Who travels, who lives alone, who answers the door without fear." I felt a small, sharp ache in my chest. I had always answered the door smiling. I believed familiarity was protection. He slid a photo across the table. It was my house, taken from across the street, from different days, different angles. "She knew your routines," he said gently. "When you watered your plants, when you made tea, when you expected company." After he left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the door. It hadn't betrayed me, but I had trusted it too easily. My son insisted I stay with him for a while. I agreed, not because I felt weak, but because I finally understood that independence doesn't mean isolation. His home was bright, busy, full of movement. I slept better there, though sometimes I woke suddenly, reaching for a phone that wasn't ringing. One evening, as we washed dishes together, he spoke quietly. "She knew things only my wife should know," he said. "Stories, habits, even how she laughs when she's nervous." That means someone talked, I said. He nodded, or listened too closely. That night, I wrote a list not of fears, but of boundaries. Who I would let in, what I would no longer explain, how I would protect my peace without apologizing for it. It felt like reclaiming ground inch by inch. Weeks passed. The woman was formally charged. The case grew larger than my house, larger than me. Other names surfaced, other addresses. I watched it from a distance, refusing to let it define me. One afternoon, while sitting on my son's porch, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't grateful for surviving. I was grateful for seeing how easily trust can be borrowed, how danger doesn't always break in. It sometimes knocks politely and waits for an invitation. And how strength doesn't roar, it listens. If my son hadn't called, I don't know what would have happened, but I do know this. I will never again ignore the feeling that tells me something is off, no matter how familiar the face in front of me appears. Because sometimes the most important warning comes in a whisper from far away. And survival depends on whether you choose to believe it. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small permissions I gave myself. The first was allowing the front door to stay closed, not locked tight with fear, but closed with intention. I stopped answering it automatically. I checked first. I waited. I chose. That simple act felt rebellious in a way I hadn't expected. After a month at my son's house, I returned home again, this time with him beside me. Boxes of groceries in his arms, sunlight pouring through the windows like a blessing I hadn't earned, but accepted anyway. We walked through each room together. The detective had said it was important, that reclaiming space helped the mind follow the body back to safety. Still, I paused at the kitchen doorway. "That's where she stood," I said quietly. My son nodded. He didn't rush me. He never rushed me anymore. We changed things, moved the table, repainted the wall a softer color. I replaced the rug she had walked across with one woven by a local woman who smiled when she sold it to me and told me her grandmother taught her the pattern. I liked that. It felt like layering the house with new stories, stronger ones. One afternoon, weeks later, my real daughter-in-law visited. She stood awkwardly on the porch, eyes full of guilt and something like grief. I could see it in the way she held herself, how deeply shaken she was by knowing her own face had been used as a weapon. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I keep thinking, what if he hadn't called?" "So do I answered honestly. We sat together for a while, not fixing things, just acknowledging the fracture. Sometimes that's the bravest form of closeness. Before she left, she hugged me carefully, as if afraid to hurt something fragile. I hugged her back, not because everything was fine, but because fear doesn't get the final say in how I love. That night, I sat alone by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, the house quiet again, but different now. Not naive, awake. I thought about how many times in my life I had brushed aside small discomforts to keep things smooth. how often I'd told myself I was overthinking, imagining, being dramatic, and how close that habit had brought me to disappearing. I keep my phone charged now. I keep my curtains drawn at night. I trust, but I verify. And I teach the women I know to do the same, gently, without paranoia. Because this story isn't about fear. It's about listening. Listening when something doesn't line up. When a voice you trust sounds different. When the world tilts just enough to notice. I don't know what became of the woman who wore my daughter-in-law's face. I don't need to. She no longer occupies space in my mind. But the lesson she left behind does. Sometimes, the people who save us aren't in the room. Sometimes they're miles away, speaking softly into a phone, saying the one thing that cuts through confusion. And sometimes, survival begins the moment we stop assuming that familiar always means safe. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest edges if you let it. Months passed, and the story slowly loosened its grip on my daily thoughts. Not gone, never gone, but folded neatly into a place where it no longer screamed for attention. I learned how to live alongside it instead of inside it. The court proceedings happened without me present. That was my choice. I gave my statement once, clearly, firmly, and then stepped back. I had spent enough energy surviving. I wasn't interested in reliving. The detective called one afternoon with the final update. They dismantled the group, he said. Your case helped connect the dots. I thanked him, surprised by how calm I felt. Justice, I realized, doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels complete. After that call, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the neighborhood children ride their bikes in uneven circles. Their laughter drifted through the air, careless and bright. Life, stubborn as ever, kept going. My son still calls before every flight, not out of fear, but habit now, a gentle ritual we both treasure. We talk about ordinary things, weather, meals, what I'm reading. But sometimes, just before hanging up, he pauses. Still good, Mom? He asks. Yes, I tell him, and I mean it. I've learned something important in these quiet months. Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision not to let fear silence you. I joined a small community group for older women, nothing dramatic. Just coffee, conversation, shared stories. When I tell mine, I don't focus on the danger. I focus on the choice to listen, the choice to question, the choice to move when staying still feels safer. I see recognition in their eyes, relief, because so many of us were taught to be polite before we were taught to be protected. At night, when the house is still, I sometimes think back to that moment at the sink, the phone ringing, the kettle humming, the ordinary evening that nearly wasn't. It reminds me how fragile normal can be, and how precious. I don't live afraid now. I live aware. There's a difference. One shrinks you, the other sharpens you. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Trust your instincts, even when the face in front of you feels familiar, especially then. Because sometimes the voice that saves your life doesn't come from the room you're in. It comes from far away, carried through a phone line, whispering the truth you need to hear. And if you listen closely enough, it just might give you everything back. I tell this story now from a place of calm. Not the calm that comes from forgetting, but the calm that comes from understanding. When people ask me if I'm still shaken, I tell them the truth. Yes, but I'm also stronger in ways I never expected to be at my age. Strength didn't arrive as bravery or boldness. It arrived as permission to trust myself without apology. I no longer rush to reassure others that I'm fine. I let silence sit when something feels off. I don't smile just to smooth things over. I don't explain my instincts away. I listen to them. That night taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Danger doesn't always announce itself. It often borrows familiarity. It wears a known face. It uses your kindness as an invitation. And safety doesn't always look dramatic either. Sometimes it's a whispered phone call. Sometimes it's a pause before turning around. Sometimes it's choosing the window over the door. I still live in the same house. I still make tea in the evenings. The kettle still hums the same way. But I am not the same woman who once assumed that being careful meant being fearful. Being careful means being awake. I've taught my grandchildren one simple rule, wrapped gently in love. If something doesn't make sense, stop. If someone pressures you to doubt yourself, pause. And if a voice you trust tells you something is wrong, listen. Because the world doesn't always give us second chances, but sometimes, if we're lucky, it gives us one moment of clarity. And what we do with that moment matters. I survived because I listened. I stayed because I questioned. I lived because I chose myself. If you remember anything from my story, let it be this. You are not wrong for noticing. You are not rude for protecting yourself. And you are never too old to step away from danger, even when it wears a familiar face. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.